the front of my brain had flattened. And 6 months later, I had regained that shape. How is that even possible? Hey soul, welcome back to the podcast. I am so excited to share with you my friend, Dr. Daniel Amen. You've probably seen him on one of his 14 or 15 PBS shows. He's written numerous books that basically have the basic premise of change your brain and you can absolutely change your life. A few years back, 2015, I was out snowboarding with my brother, big shout out to Patrick Ferry, and experienced my 5th concussion in about 3 seasons. And, it's early in the year and I wasn't, like an incredible snowboarder doing all these crazy jumps. I just slipped backwards and hit my head for the final time. And as the phrase, my bell was rung was happening to me, I literally said to myself, this just isn't good. I'm really hurting my brain. And, 2 months later, I'm back out on the road. I'm doing my thing. I'm out doing seminars. And all of a sudden, I found myself in a conversation that I would have, every day on the road doing an event, every day coaching with someone. And I was talking about something that I had trained on, hundreds of times and literally forgot my points. It literally forgot. It's like forgetting your address. It's like forgetting, your spouse's name. I was finding myself losing it and wondering what is going on. I ended up calling a buddy of mine. He's a brain surgeon, fascinating guy, longtime friend. Chris, hey man, what's going on here? I'm really having these problems where I feel like my memory's going away. I feel like I'm losing a step. And I said, I'm a young guy. This isn't supposed to be happening. What do I do? And he said, have you met Dr. Daniel Amen? I said, no. And of course, as soon as he said the name, suddenly I'm online. I'm looking at, videos. I saw his TED Talk, watched some of his early work. And I thought, okay, I need to meet this guy. Chris invites me to an event that he happened to be doing with Daniel where they're talking about the brain, and Chris talking about it from a surgical standpoint and Daniel talking about it from a heal your brain standpoint. So I'm sitting there watching this event and I'm taking more notes than anybody else. How am I going to fix my brain? I got the chance to meet Daniel afterwards, and then he invited me to come do this thing called a brain spec, which he had talked about. And today I'm actually going to have Daniel talk about that experience along with everything from neurohormone deficiencies, mindstorms, toxins, head trauma, genetics. Is it a death sentence or is it just simply something you need to be aware of? Inflammation's impact on the brain, blood flow's impact on the brain, aging, diabesity, which is a word that I had not heard prior to today, and so much more. So whether you're riding your bike or you're walking your dog or you are driving in the car or you're just casually listening to this, know this: the time you're about to spend with Daniel Amen and I is going to change your life forever when you adopt some of the basic principles that he discusses so you can change your brain and ultimately change your life. So enjoy the podcast. Have you ever had that moment where you just felt like you were skipping a beat, where you were missing something? You had memory loss. You just were in the middle of a presentation and you forgot what you were talking about, who you were with, and what you were doing. Well, would it shock you to hear that after 5 concussions out snowboarding with my little brother, Patrick Ferry, I finally realized I may have a brain problem. And fortunately enough, I have a really good friend of mine, Dr. Chris Duma, who I reached out to him. Now, he's a surgeon. He's a brain surgeon. I said, Chris, I'm having these issues. What do you recommend? And he said, well, I'm doing an event with this guy, Dr. Daniel Amen, down at the Balboa Bay Club. Why don't you come by and take a listen? He said, this guy is a genius and he can help you heal your brain. So obviously I was interested. My wife and I show up to the charity function, and I'm probably the only person when Daniel was talking that was taking rigorous notes on what I could actually do, because I was not just in a funk. I think there was even moments where I was getting slightly depressed, that I was thinking something was really wrong. Can I recover from this? Am I going to be like this for the rest of my life? How could I, as an author, a coach, a speaker, someone that's standing in front of audiences every single day presenting these ideas and strategies, and I was literally forgetting some of my most fundamental points. After spending just a little bit of time with Daniel, I very quickly signed up for his spec, where I actually went in, spent some time with him, did all the brain work, and he put me on a plan. And I can proudly say that 18 months later, and it really wasn't even probably 18 months, it was probably 9 months later, I was back to being 100% normal. And I thought to myself, my goodness, you can actually change your brain. So today, If you have not watched this guy, whether it's on PBS or read one of his amazing books or seen his legendary YouTube performances, I am super excited to introduce you to my friend, Dr. Daniel Amen. Daniel.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, my friend. So obviously I'm telling my story, and these are, people that I get to talk to all the time. Tell the people that are listening, who is Daniel Amen? Give them a little background on who you are. I mean, I think back to, getting into the military, to the beginning of, psychology and being a psychiatrist, but tell them the whole story.
Wow. So I'm one of 7 children. That's very important.
Yes.
Gotten a lot of criticism in my life, and I have 5 sisters, so I got used to it early.
Yes, yes.
My father's the American dream. He came from very poor immigrant parents who worked in a foundry in Flint, Michigan, and he decided, thankfully, he didn't like Michigan.
Yes.
It was too cold in the winter, and he came to Southern California when he was 17 and married my mom when she was 20. And being good Roman Catholics, had a lot of children. And third, which is completely not special. I have an older brother and an older sister and 4 younger sisters. So growing up, there was a lot of
You were the monkey in the middle, basically.
I was. Yeah, I was sort of unseen. And my dad, his favorite word was bullshit. His second favorite word was no.
Yes.
And he worked all the time. So really, the only time I ever saw him is when I went to work.
Yes.
So I learned when I was 10 years old to work.
Yeah.
And so that has sort of stayed with me. But I had an awesome mother and an awesome grandfather who really sort of put the nurturing part of me into me.
Yes.
And when I was 18, it was 1972, which meant the government still had a draft.
Exactly.
And Vietnam was still going on,
Yeah.
and I had a really low draft number, which meant bye. And I became an infantry medic, and that's where my love of medicine was born. But about a year into it, I realized 2 important things about myself. I hate being shot at. It's just not me. I'm just like, no, there are bullets and they're going to rip your shoulder off. And I'm like, no. And I didn't really like sleeping in the mud. That was just not my thing.
Yes.
And, Tana, my wife, wants to go camping. And I'm like, I've done that.
I've done that once. I don't need to do that again.
So I got retrained as an X-ray technician and developed a passion for imaging.
Was that your choice, or was that a military, hey, Daniel, we're going to throw you over here?
No,
because that's
that
such
was
an
my
important
choice. I had to.
Yes.
So I was in Germany at the time. Thankfully, I didn't go to Vietnam. I was stationed in West Germany, so it was actually called West Germany at the time, where our job was to protect the West Germans from the Russians. And I was working in a dispensary, and I'm like, I need to change my job. And so I learned to be like the best I could. So they would put me into this open slot to be an X-ray technician. I love taking pictures, and I had my own little X-ray department in the dispensary in Friedberg, Germany. And I just fell in love with imaging. And our teachers used to always say, how do you know unless you look?
Yes.
How do you know unless you look? And that just stuck. And so got out of the Army in 1975 and went to college, actually for a year at Orange Coast College here in Orange County. I hang in their Hall of Fame, which is fun for me.
I would be in their Hall of Shame. I was there for 1 semester.
But I was on the speech team.
Really?
I just had to take a speech class.
Sure.
And my speech teacher said, you should be on the team. And in 1976, I won the California State Championship for peace oratory. I actually had a speech I did arguing for a 2-state solution in Israel and Palestine, because my grandparents, my grandmother was raised in Bethlehem. And so anyways, that's where the speech stuff started. And becomes very important.
Imaging, speaking, keep going.
And then I decided to go to medical school, even though my speech teacher told me I wasn't smart enough. Apparently she had a brother who went to Michigan State and he didn't get in, and she's like, you should do something else.
Yeah.
And I talked to my dad, who said, don't spend any more time around that woman.
Yeah.
Because it's like, you
Bullshit.
spend time around bullshit
Yeah.
was what he
Yeah.
would say. And anyways, I ended up going to medical school at Oral Roberts University in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Loved it. And I went back in the Army so I could do my psychiatric residency at the Walter Reed Army Medical Center. It's this world-class, huge institution. And but the reason I became a psychiatrist is my childhood sweetheart. I married her when I was a second-year medical student, and 3 months later she tried to kill herself. And I'm completely freaked out because I have no idea what to do. Because mental illness was actually not part of my family growing up. I mean, I had a dad who, he's larger than life personality, but it was just not part of my experience. And so I took her to the chairman of the Department of Psychiatry at ORU, and I fell in love with him. I mean, not sexually, but I fell in love with him because I realized if he helped her, it wouldn't just help her, that it would help me.
It would change
It would
everyone.
help
Yes.
her
Yes.
son. When we got married, she had a 2-year-old who I adopted. And I just saw psychiatry has the ability to change generations of people. And it was personal to me.
Yes.
And I have loved it every single day for the last 40 years.
Yes.
Except I joined the only medical specialty that never looks at the organ it treated. And I inherited the word bullshit from my father.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, why aren't you looking? Obviously, these are brain-related problems. It's not because this person just wants to be an ass.
Yes.
I actually recently did a vlog, which I just learned about, is a video blog that Logan Paul is one of the famous YouTube bloggers that and Logan had all sorts of problems. He came to our clinic in Encino. I have a new clinic there, and his chief complaint was, I want to know why I'm an asshole. I
Isn't
love
that interesting?
that. I love the insight.
Yes.
And it turned out he had a significant brain injury, a trampoline accident when he was 12 years old. And it's easy to call him bad. It's much harder to go, why?
Exactly.
And so I knew that. So when I became a psychiatrist, I'm looking for imaging. How do you know unless you look? And then I did my residency at the Walter Reed Army Medical Center. Was there for 3 years. And then I'm also a child psychiatrist. I did that in Hawaii, which that was awesome.
Smart move.
And then the Army sent me to a little place in the Mojave Desert called Fort Irwin, where they train the American soldiers to fight the Russians in the desert. And, later it's the Iraqis and so on. And while I'm there, I'm still searching, and I come across neurofeedback, which is a treatment where we put electrodes on your skull, monitor the activity in your brain, and teach you to change it. And now I'm like, I'm in love.
Yes.
And from
were they doing early, like what we have done, the early imaging of that, or was it just reading it on a monitor?
It was hooking your brain up to a computer and actually being able to look at the electrical activity. And I still do that.
Yes.
So it's a study now we do called quantitative EEG. It looks at the electrical activity in your brain. But I did that in 1987, 1988. And I'm so excited. But in 1991, so in 1989, I got out of the Army because I realized they had more places like Fort Irwin, right? I mean, 40 miles north of Barstow is not your idea of fun.
No.
And I set up the first Amen Clinic. So we just had our 30th birthday.
Happy birthday.
And in 1991, I started doing a study called brain SPECT imaging. And SPECT looks at blood flow and activity. It looks at how your brain works. And I was the director of a substance abuse treatment program at the local hospital where I was living in Northern California. And I just walked into this grand rounds at my hospital, and the doctor who was head of medicine at the local hospital said, SPECT is a tool to give psychiatrists more information to help your patients. And my first 10 cases, it dramatically changed what I did with my patients, and I was hooked. One patient, her name was Matilda, she'd been admitted to my service because she'd been diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. And she almost burned the house down. She had 5 girls, so I bonded with the family.
How old was she?
She's 69.
Okay, so young.
And when you look at her, she looks like she had Alzheimer's disease. She couldn't remember anything. Her affect was flat. Her facial expressions were flat. But I'm like, how the heck do I know? So I looked. And in 1991, there was already imaging studies on Alzheimer's disease. The back half of your brain is dying. So that's what we see in Alzheimer's. She didn't have that. Her emotional brain was working way too hard. I'm like, oh, she has this thing called pseudo dementia, where she looks like she's demented, but she's really depressed. And on Wellbutrin, a really good antidepressant, within 3 weeks, she's teaching cooking classes on the ward. And it was like the movie Awakenings with Robin Williams. And except what's different than Awakenings is she stayed that way. And I'm like a little kid, because I went into this not for the money. I went into it to help people, because that's my reward, is when you get better, that's my reward. And I'm just like a little kid, so excited. I had another 12-year-old boy who was very violent and aggressive, took a pencil at school, put it in the neck of one of his friends, and he'd seen psychiatrists, and I'm like, so why is he just awful? Why? And when I scanned him, he had damage to his temporal lobe, and his frontal lobes were sleepy. So what I learned, damage to your temporal lobe can go with mood instability, irritability, temper problems, memory and learning problems, and frontal lobes, he can't supervise himself. So when I targeted his medicine, he literally became one of the sweetest people on the planet.
And not just drugged out, dummied out.
No.
Yeah.
Because when people do that, it means they don't know how to use medicine. Because that's not the goal. That's never the goal.
We all see that. I mean, I'm interjecting and interrupting because we have my brain specs in front of us. And I think it'd be really interesting, because you could talk cases for days, but I want to make it personal. I literally text Daniel last night at like 10:30 at night and said, could you bring in my before and after, right? Let's show them, because I guarantee the people that are listening to this right now, they've experienced what we're talking about, whether it's being angry, getting upset. I actually wrote down one of the questions was, how do we help people eliminate some of the emotional highs and lows, right? So we're going to get into all of that, but take a second and show them, and obviously we'll be putting this up on the screens if you're watching this, and if you're just listening to the audio, you might want to jump over to tomferry.com and actually take a look at this. Take a minute and show the people, maybe to that camera, what my brain looked like when I first came into you, and then let's talk about what we did to get it back on track. Or maybe, you just describe it. You're the doctor. Take it away.
SPECT looks at blood flow and activity. It's different than a CAT scan or an MRI. They show what the brain actually physically looks like. This looks at function.
Yes.
And so it's the difference between popping the engine of a car and seeing what the engine actually physically looks like versus SPECT is turning the car on and seeing how it works.
Yes.
And if you have an anatomical problem, this is likely to show it to me. But this is a functional problem. And so here, SPECT basically tells us 3 things: good activity, too little, or too much. And then my job is to balance it. And this is looking at the outside surface of the brain. So this view, we're looking up from the bottom. The top is the front part of the brain, the bottom is the back. And what we want is full, even, symmetrical activity. This is from one side, the other side, and this is looking down from the top. And a little bumpy, but the one I'm really worried about is your left temporal lobe and your right temporal lobe are clearly hurt in a pattern consistent with multiple concussions because the temporal lobe should be full and fat, and it looked like somebody pinched them in.
Yes.
And, I always say if I was God's consultant, I would have put bumper guards around the bones in your temporal lobes because they're very sharp. You were never meant to snowboard.
No.
You were never meant to play football. You were never meant to hit soccer balls with your head.
Rich.
And
calling a shout out to my producer over here who's a soccer player.
So it's troubled. And I could see why you were having trouble because there's actually a very interesting part of the temporal lobes called the hippocampus. We should talk about that because the hippocampus is the brain's major mood, memory, and learning center.
Okay, mood, memory, and learning. But outside of that, what does it really do?
Hippocampus comes from the Greek, and it actually means seahorse. And because it's shaped like a seahorse, actually in my living room I have a big painting of the hippocampus because it's so important.
Yes.
And every day you make about 700 new stem cell seahorses. So the hippocampus is one of the few areas of the brain that continues to renew itself by this stem cell production. But what's interesting, I just turned 65. My seahorses are not likely to stick around where my 15, almost 16-year-old daughter, hers are.
Yes.
Why? Because it's blood flow. Did you know that neurons, brain cells, don't age? It's our blood vessels that age. So whatever you can do to take care of your vasculature, your blood vessels, that is the secret to anti-aging. Which means it's exercise and not smoking, not drinking much caffeine, not drinking much alcohol, because all of those things decrease blood flow. I'll say the controversial thing everybody asks me, marijuana is not good medicine for your brain.
Oh, man,
right
I'm
now,
so
if you're
glad you're
dying
saying
of cancer,
that's different.
Use it to eat.
But if it's Tuesday and you're having an edible because you're just going out with your friends,
it's prematurely aging your brain. Now, so in your scan, bilateral, both sides, temporal lobes not healthy. And you were feeling
100%.
The other image, so here in this one, blue is, actually, I want this one.
There we go.
Blue is average activity. Red and white are the most active parts of the brain. And in a healthy scan for a man your age, the back part is really active, and everything else is sort of quiet. But
and remind us, what is the back part? Because this is like the supercomputer.
So the back bottom part of our brain, we have an organ called the cerebellum, which is 10% of the brain's volume, but 50% of the brain's neurons. Half of your neurons are in the cerebellum. So cerebellum is Latin for little brain, but it's way more important than most people think. And most psychiatrists never even think about the cerebellum because they never look at the brain. Which has been something I've been trying to change, right? It's one of the missions of my life. I want you to love your brain and look at it. Anyways, your cerebellum...
Don't open up your head, just in case you're wondering.
Your cerebellum is sleepy, but your anxiety centers are up. And if you look here, it almost looks like a diamond in there. And that can go with past emotional trauma. Now, it doesn't mean it has to, but whenever I see it, I'm like, is there any significant trauma? Now,
I remember we talked, you were asking me all these questions, like before you even showed me this, you were saying, now did something happen in the early days? And I'm thinking, well, I was kicked out of 5 high schools, kicked out of both parents' homes. Sure. Right? I mean, but that was 30 years ago.
And it left a lasting imprint.
Exactly.
In your brain. And your basal ganglia, which are here, they're white hot. Mine are too. These are people who can't stop working. They're just always,
go.
They go on vacation, they walk on the beach for like 10 minutes. And
then they write a book.
Let's go do something.
Exactly.
Relaxing. And the beautiful thing, and why I'm showing you this is clearly a brain headed for trouble. and your follow-up scan, and so this was 2/12/16, and this is 6 months later, is your cerebellum is so much healthier. Mm-hmm. This is what a healthy cerebellum looks like, and it's involved in processing and being able to think quickly. And if you're a speaker, you have to do that. People are asking you questions all the time. The top part of the diamond is calmer. The basal ganglia, the anxiety center on the other side's calmer. So we're making progress. And then in the outside, you have better temporal lobe activity, especially here on the left side. Yeah. So it's like 6 months, and we're making serious progress.
So I know people are going to want to know how, but I want to, and we're going to cover that, but I want to just acknowledge this too. When I first looked at this and saw basically the front of my brain had flattened, and 6 months later, I'd regained that shape. How is that even possible? First of all, how is that possible? Did I bang my head in the back so hard that my brain actually smushed back into my head?
Right.
It's a frightening thought.
Well, but your brain is in a closed space. So this is why you should never let a child hit a soccer ball with their head. Your brain is in a very hard skull that has multiple sharp, bony ridges. So if I brought my model, you look inside and you're like, oh my God. Because if you damage your brain, you damage your ability to do everything in your life, from being married, which is hard enough with the good brain, to doing well at work, to managing your money, to managing your health. You know, 70% of us in America are overweight, and I published 2 studies that show as your weight goes up, the size and function of your brain goes down. And if we hurt it, it's so hard to make a good decision about food anyways. Now you're much more likely to make a bad decision, which has long-term negative consequences.
I think this is so important for people. You might even want to rewind that, because it's basically success begets success, but damage begets more pain, more suffering, which makes bad decisions, poor decisions that massively impact your life. That's why his work is so important for me. So talk about how, because when people ask me, I was traveling around the country after I got this, and every seminar I do, I'd go, if you saw me speak 8 months ago, this was my brain. This is my brain now. And they're like, what did you do? Now I can give the answer, but I want to hear it from the doctor's orders here. What was the program you put me on?
So before I started imaging, I didn't care about my own brain. It's crazy, right? I was the top neuroscience student in my medical school. And I'd never seen mine. And I didn't know it was really part of the program to get people well. I'm so embarrassed when I say that. But when I scanned myself in 1991, so when I started scanning, I scanned everybody I knew. I scanned my mom, who has a perfect brain, but it fits the quality of her life. She's 88 and has 50 grandchildren, great-grandchildren. She knows everybody's name. She's everybody's best friend. She's the most consistent, reliable, loving human on the planet. And then I scanned mine, and it wasn't good, because I played football in high school. And I had meningitis when I was a young soldier, and I had a lot of bad habits. So here I am helping people with psychiatric problems. I don't care at all about my own brain. I'm chubby, I'm not sleeping, I'm eating bad food. I see mine. I develop a concept I call brain envy. I wanted my mother's brain. And, I always say Freud was wrong. Penis envy is not the cause of anybody's problems. In 40 years, I've never seen it once. But, the thing you really want is a better brain. And so brain health is ultimately 3 things. Brain envy, you got to care about it. Avoid anything that hurts it. You have to know the list, and we've already talked about head trauma and marijuana and alcohol and nicotine and caffeine. Avoid things that hurt it. Do things that help it. You have to know the list. And ultimately, in my new book, The End of Mental Illness, that I'm working on, I came up with a mnemonic called Bright Minds, and it tells you what to avoid and what to do. And so if you want to keep your brain healthy or rescue it, which we did with you, rescue it if it's headed to the dark place, you have to prevent or treat the 11 major risk factors that steal your mind. And we know what they are. And give us
a few examples. Don't
is the mnemonic, and the B in Bright Minds is for blood flow, right? Low blood flow is the number one brain imaging predictor of Alzheimer's disease. It's also seen in ADHD, in depression, and schizophrenia. You don't want to ever do anything that damages your blood vessels. So my grandfather, who I love dearly, had his first heart attack. He developed a major depression a year later, and that's very common because any blood vessel disorder is likely to increase your risk of psychiatric disorders. And I learned that firsthand because I loved him, and it was so sad for me to see. So blood flow. So anything that hurts it, caffeine, nicotine, not exercising, hypertension, as blood pressure goes up, blood flow to the brain goes down.
Hypertension as in stress?
Hypertension is in high blood pressure.
Okay.
And any form of heart disease, heart arrhythmia, heart attack, heart infection, those things. So if you love your brain, you have to love your heart and do the right things. And this is going to sound bizarre, but did you know 40% of 40-year-old men have erectile dysfunction? What's that?
Really?
It's a blood flow problem.
Of course.
70% of 70-year-old men have erectile dysfunction. And so if you love your brain, which means you'll love your heart, your sexual performance will be better.
Yes.
And that's actually one of the things my patients often tell me is my sex life is so much better since I started working with you.
Yeah.
It's about blood flow.
Ladies and gentlemen, bonuses in listening to this podcast. Pay attention to the blood flow.
So R is retirement and aging. When you stop learning, your brain starts dying.
Yes.
And, I just turned 65. I've seen thousands of 65-year-old and older brains. It's not good news.
No.
But it doesn't have to be bad news.
Yeah.
If you get serious, you can. I have this whole group of 90-year-old men and women that have stunning-looking brains. My grandmother was one. I got her brain at 92. It was gorgeous. And her secret was knitting. Because knitting is a cerebellar exercise. Because the cerebellum's involved in coordination. And it's this fine motor coordination.
Like ping pong.
Ping pong is
Right.
awesome.
Yeah.
And people who play racket sports live longer than everybody else. Did you know that?
I'm not shocked.
And people who played football and soccer live less long than anybody else.
Well, unfortunately, we keep seeing that in the news.
No question.
Yeah.
So R is retirement and age, and you want to make new learning part of everything you do, which is why this podcast is good. Your training programs, what you're doing is you're stretching people's brains and helping them make money, which decreases their stress at the same time. I is inflammation, which is a major cause of depression and dementia. And I did a study on omega-3 fatty acid levels, because when they're low, inflammation goes up. 97% of the population had suboptimal levels of omega-3 fatty acids.
And aren't we just talking about fish oils here?
Fish oil, fish, and not eating processed foods filled with pro-inflammatory foods like corn, soy, wheat, and dairy. And people go, oh, that's everything I eat. Well, there's 10,000 other choices. You know, God gave you a big brain for a reason.
Yes. But also I go back and say, but you're overweight, you're depressed, you're upset most of the time, and you're eating stuff that's actually creating it. I think that's the connection that people aren't making. They know it's bad for them, right? But it's Jim Quick, when we had him in here, Jim Quick would always say, it's common sense to common practice. People understand it, they just don't do it.
And so you have to give them a reason why.
Yes.
And so as I try to go around the world and create brain envy, it's like, oh, I love my brain. And I worked with BJ Fogg. Do you know BJ?
No.
He's a really interesting guy. He works at the Stanford Persuasive Tech Lab. And it's about how people change.
Yes.
And so we worked with him for 6 months, and we created 50 tiny habits. So tiny habits is this thing. What is the smallest thing I can do today that will make the biggest difference in your life? And so our number one tiny habit is, before you do anything, before you say anything, before you eat anything, just ask yourself, is this good for my brain or bad for it? Oh. And if you can answer that question with love, because doing the right thing is never about you should do it. Because if you think you should do it, you won't do it.
No.
God said you shouldn't go to the tree. The next scene in the book of Genesis, they're at the tree. Now, God said to Adam, what is your goal?
Yeah.
And my goal is for her not to wear clothes.
Yeah.
And she goes, let's go to the tree. It's like, no, it doesn't fit the goals I have for my life. You're gonna wear clothes, and they're gonna kick us out of the Garden of Eden. Bad idea. But because people don't make decisions based on their goals, they make impulsive decisions. But I love sugar. I love alcohol. It's like, that's like a bad relationship.
Yeah, I need is the one I hear all the time. But I just need a glass of wine to mellow out. Or I need to, I just need to eat something, that's just going to mellow me out.
It's the lie that will kill them.
Yeah.
Right? Because ultimately you need a healthy brain.
Yes.
Because without it, everything in your life is harder. And so also under inflammation is the gut-brain connection. Because when your gut is not right, you're more likely to be inflamed, because you develop this thing called leaky gut, where stuff gets inside your body that you don't want. And it can cause autoimmune disorders, can cause pain, can cause arthritis. Probiotics can be really helpful.
Say probiotics. This is where Brad Davidson changed my life when I was 40. He's like, you have to kill all inflammation in your body, and we got to get your gut healthy. And, I'd heard this before, like, how many times should you go to the bathroom every day? And my old nutritionist would say, well, how many meals did you have today? And I was like, 3. She's like, well, there's your number. I'm like, holy crow. Then I would just go around and ask people, how many times do you go to the bathroom every day? Oh, Ferry, why are you asking such a weird question? I'm like, well, how many times? They're like, maybe once. And I'm like, oh my God, you're full of shit. So do you have any stats on that? Like I'm obviously sharing things that I was told early on. Inflammation, the impact of the lack of digestion, right? The lack of gut health.
If your gut's not right, you're more likely to have brain fog. You're more likely to be anxious and have trouble sleeping. You have 100 trillion bugs in your gut today.
Yes.
10 times the number of cells in your body. So it's almost like the body is the host for the bugs.
And we're talking parasites right now. Other than parasites?
There are bacteria, there are viruses, there's some parasites. And you should have about 85% healthy bugs to about 15% of the troublemakers. People have heard of E. coli. And so everybody has E. coli in them. It's when you damage the healthy ones. And how do you do that? Well, what does alcohol kill? Bugs. My wife's a nurse, and why does she put alcohol on your skin before she gives you a shot? Because it's killing the bugs. So drinking a lot of alcohol is murdering a lot of the bugs. Antibiotics, what do antibiotics kill? Bugs. Pesticides, what do pesticides kill? Bugs. It's like, well, I don't need pesticides. Well, every time you're eating something that's not organic, and some of the times when you are eating organic, you're ingesting pesticides. Artificial sweeteners like Splenda have been shown to damage the microbiome or the bugs.
You know that there's a whole bunch of people listening right now like, oh, well, there's nothing I can do then. I mean, he's taking all the fun, no caffeine, no nicotine. I don't like exercise. I got to eat fish oil every day or eat fish every day. I can't drink. I can't smoke. I'm thinking of that Adam Ant song. What do you do?
So I have a high school course.
Let's hear it.
Called Brain Thrive by 25. And actually, if people want to learn more about our online courses at Amen University. But this is my favorite course. And we've taught it for 10 years. It's in all 50 states, 7 countries. And we teach kids this information. We teach them to fall in love with their brain. And invariably, a 9-year-old, a ninth grade boy, never girl, will raise his hand and go, how can you have any fun? Just like you just said. And we play this game with them called Who Has More Fun? The kid with the good brain or the kid with the bad brain? Who gets the girl and gets to keep her because he's not an ass?
Yeah.
The kid with the good brain or the kid with the bad brain? Who has the most independence because their parents trust them the most? The kid with the good brain or the kid with the bad brain? Who gets into the college they want to get into? Who ultimately makes and keeps the most money because of the decisions they make? Who lives the longest? Who has the most meaning and purpose? So I don't want to hear I can't have any fun. That means your mindset is screwed up.
I agree.
Because without a healthy brain, nothing in your life is as good as it can be.
Take that, everybody. All right, so
you know, with my last name, I could have been a preacher.
I know you could have.
But when I heard, because growing up Catholic, I'm like, Father, amen. It's like nobody would believe that.
Yes. So blood flow, retirement and aging, inflammation. What's the next one?
Genetics. G is for genetics. And people get genetics all backwards because genes are not a death sentence. They should be a wake-up call. I have heart disease in my family. I have obesity in my family.
Really?
I have a brother that's 150 pounds overweight. I have a sister that's the same. And it horrifies me. So when I tested my genome, it said I should be fat, but I'm not. Why? Because I know it's a risk, and I'm going to do everything I can to protect myself from the risk. So I have this great scan of Lisa Gibbons. So Lisa is a well-known celebrity whose mother and grandmother died with Alzheimer's disease.
Really?
And she came to see me when she was 51 because she was stressed and going through some personal stuff. And she lets me tell the story. And her brain looks like she was headed for Alzheimer's disease. Because we can actually see if you're headed for Alzheimer's disease decades before you have any symptoms, whether or not you're headed for the dark place.
Okay, before you tell me, where do you see that in the spec?
So what you see, so if we go to your first scan, what you see is the back half of your brain is dying. So I would see low activity here, but I would also see this area. It's called the posterior cingulate, and it's visual memory integration. And yours is sort of sleepy. But 6 months later, it's phenomenal.
Yes. Yeah.
And so what we're doing is preventing it in you. Well, how exciting is that?
Absolutely.
Because you're not an in-the-moment person where I'm just going to make a decision for now. You are thinking about 5 years from now, about 10 years from now.
I've got a 20-year vision for my life, and it has a healthy brain in it.
And a healthy brain in it. So the impulse to drink or the impulse to have the banana split, it doesn't fit, right? I use those words with my patients all the time. So then what? If I do this, then what happens? And does it fit? And does it fit with the goals I have for my life? So genes, and I have some genetic interventions, blueberries, green tea, curcumin, all help and the gene story is so interesting because it's like, oh, I have heart disease in my family. There's nothing I can do.
Everyone thinks it's a death sentence.
And it's complete nonsense because of the thing we learned about 20 years ago called epigenetics, that my habits turn on or off certain genes that make illness more or less likely in my babies and grandbabies. And so it's not about you. It's about generations of you. And in my new book, The End of Mental Illness, I actually dedicated it to my two nieces. They were raised in chaos. They have a huge genetic risk factor for mental illness: schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, OCD, depression, addictions, criminal behavior. And they were raised by parents who had domestic violence, depression, drug abuse. They went to multiple schools. And about 3 years ago...
Is this Tanya's family or is this
Tanya's family?
Okay, sorry.
Her half-sister, she was estranged from her half-sister. But when we got a call from CPS that they had taken the children, we knew we must act. And so we wrapped services around their mother, who was an addict at the time. She just had her 1-year chip. I'm so proud of her.
Congrats.
And we know these girls are loaded for mental illness. And so at the end of mental illness, how do I prevent it in them and their babies and grandbabies? And they're doing phenomenally well.
Yes.
But, you know, they're no longer addicted to hot Cheetos. You know, my first grocery trip with them, grocery store trip, was so painful for them because I said, look, before we go in, I'm just going to tell you, I don't spend money on things that are going to hurt you. And so that was hard for them.
They're like, what does that even mean? Right?
That means is half of what they wanted they didn't get.
Yes.
But now, and we made the turn about 4 months into this thing when we're at Summer House in Corona Del Mar.
Yep.
And Alize ordered a salmon salad and finished it and liked it. And now, is this
had that
good
salad.
for my brain or bad for it?
Yes.
So genes are not a death sentence.
Yes.
Needs
I think that's
to be a wake-up call.
So important for everybody listening to this, because I mean, we've all heard that story. I mean, you hear it millions of times. I've heard it, you know, thousands of times from people say, well, you know, my family, the way we were raised, who we are, my parents, in my, you know, like in my blood, I have a bad back. I'm like, well, the fact that you're 25 pounds overweight doesn't help, and you don't exercise and you never stretch. Well, no, it's my genetics. I mean,
It's the lie.
How do you get people, like, what's your best hack to actually get people to create awareness that they can take control and do something about it?
I scan them. That's why I loved imaging.
Yeah.
Because you see it and you go,
That's why I
oh my
loved
God,
imaging.
this is terrible.
Yes.
I want it better. So you,
Yes.
like me,
Yes.
when I saw my terrible scan, I developed brain envy. You did the same thing.
Yep.
And then you acted on it.
Yes.
And within 6 months, you got benefit. I did the big NFL study. So the H is head
Yep.
trauma.
Yes.
Brain is soft, about the consistency of soft butter. Skull is really hard. Skull has sharp bony ridges. Head trauma is a major cause of psychiatric illness. And nobody knows about it because most psychiatrists never look at the brain.
Yes.
It's just not part of what they were taught to do. And it's not part of, you know, they go, oh, what is the scan going to tell you? The underlying physiology of the patient in front of you. You're going to really guess at that? Are you insane? And one of the things I learned is 40% of the patients who come to Amen clinics had a significant brain injury.
Interesting.
Before they came to see us. And it's a major cause of homelessness, of suicide, of alcohol abuse, of drug abuse, of depression, of panic attacks. And you know, I mean, that's why you and I are sitting here and standing
Exactly.
here talking,
Yeah.
is that head trauma damages people's lives.
Tell the story about Andrew. I just
you'll
watched
make
your
me
TED
cry.
Talk
You'll make me
again, and I feel the same way. But this is an important story.
So when I first started doing imaging, I was so excited. I was a little kid. I mean, it's like my life was meant to do
Yes.
this. I got no end of grief from my colleagues. But like my dad, I'm good at saying bullshit.
Yeah.
And I just kept doing it. But I have two personal flaws that I don't like. Is one, I like being liked. And two is I hate conflict. And so
Interesting.
now I'm being hated by my colleagues.
Yes.
And I'm in a war.
Yeah.
And I was being worn out by it emotionally. And then in April 1995, I got a call from my sister-in-law, Sherry, 10:30 one night, that my 9-year-old nephew, who's also my godson, attacked a little girl on the baseball field that day for no reason. And he hurt her. And I'm horrified. And I'm like, what else is going on with him? And she said, Danny, he's different. He's mean. He doesn't smile anymore. I went into his room today and found 2 pictures he had drawn. One of them, he was hanging from a tree in a suicide. The other one, he was shooting other children.
We're talking a 9-year-old little boy.
9-year-old boy. Who's Columbine?
Yeah.
Or Sandy Hook or Aurora.
Waiting to happen.
Waiting to happen. And now I'd already been scanning people for 4 years. So my first thought is you have to scan him. My next thought is you want to scan everybody.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a
Yes.
family problem.
Yes.
Except I knew his family. His mom and dad are great people. And so they brought him to see me. And I held his hand while he held his teddy bear and got scanned.
Yeah.
And he had a cyst the size of a golf ball occupying the space of his
Talking
temporal
about
lobe.
this morning.
And I called his pediatrician. I said, find somebody to take this out. And he called 3 neurologists. All of them said they didn't think the cyst was related to his behavior problem. And they wouldn't operate on him until he had real symptoms. And I remember
because the physical attack of the child, or writing, suicide notes essentially in color,
is not. And I'm like, I have a homicidal, suicidal boy.
Yeah.
What do you mean by real symptoms? And he got anxious because I'm really pissed off.
Yeah.
And he's like, well, I think they mean seizures or he loses consciousness. I'm like, you're really going to wait until he has seizures or losing consciousness? So I hung up. And then I called the neurosurgeon at UCLA, the pediatric neurosurgeon, Jorge Lazara, and he said, Dr. Amen, when kids with cysts are symptomatic, we drain them. He's obviously symptomatic. And I got 2 calls after surgery. One from his mother saying that when Andrew woke up from surgery, he smiled at her. He hadn't smiled for a year. The second call was from Dr. Lazare, who said, oh my God, Dr. Amen, that cyst was so aggressive and it put so much pressure on his brain that it actually thinned the bone over his temporal lobe, that is now eggshells thin. He said if he would have been hit in the head with a ball, would have killed him instantly. Either way, he would have been dead in 6 months. If that was the moment, I didn't care if you liked me anymore.
Yeah.
And now, Andrew, goodness, he's 33, and he's married. He got married last year. I cried through the whole thing. He owns his own home. He's got a job. He's a normal, wonderful human. The easy thing when people do bad things is to call them bad. That's easy. The hard thing is to go, why? And we need to create a new paradigm where we look at the brain on a regular basis, and to not do that is insane.
Yes.
Because to think I could just guess at what was wrong with him. Most 999 psychiatrists out of 1,000 child psychiatrists would have put him on meds and put him in therapy.
Yep. But that
how
seems
would that
to be,
work?
that is the norm of our society.
It's the norm.
We
think of depression as a Prozac deficiency.
Exactly.
When it's not. It's a symptom of a troubled brain.
Yeah. So we're going through this list, but I want to bounce. for a minute because I have all these questions, and a lot of people are asking questions on Instagram that I want to hit you with, and we're going to come back to get to T on Bright. But one of the questions that was brought up is, tell me how to eliminate the lows in depression.
Well, the first thing you do is you start loving your brain. It's the first thing you do. I always think of people in 4 big circles. There's a biological part to us, so that's the bright minds and brain. There's a psychological part to us where I teach people to kill the ants, the automatic negative thoughts that steal their happiness. There's a social part of us, maybe the highs and lows are because you're around really difficult people who have bad brains.
And by the way, we're talking about all my entrepreneurial, crazy rock star salespeople, real estate agents, lenders, et cetera, that's exactly, they're in the stress all day long. Keep going.
And then there's a spiritual part to all of us, which is, why are you on the planet? Why do you care? If you're purpose driven, like you are, and like I am, you tend to be happier.
Yes.
But it's all 4 of those circles working together to make you who you are. And so you want better moods. Well, the first thing you need is a better diet.
Yes.
There's this great study from Australia where they measured people from 2 of their outer islands. One of them had fast food restaurants on the island. The other one did not. The one who had fast food restaurants, significantly lower levels of omega-3 fatty acids, so they had more inflammation, and 5 times the level of depression.
Really?
Just because of the food they were eating.
Yes.
And so I think know better, do better. And if you just increase the number of green leafy vegetables and colorful vegetables, your mood is better. They found it to actually be a treatment for depression.
Yes. So someone else asked, and kind of staying in this same line, was, hold on, I want to find it really fast here. The 5 must supplements for a healthy brain.
So,
And the 5 may just be a random number. So the supplements for a healthy brain.
so part of it depends on your brain.
Yeah.
But I think everybody should take multiple vitamin because it, according to the CDC, we have nutrient deficiencies in this country. Magnesium, zinc, vitamin C, vitamin D, and a multiple vitamin just helps to prevent. Omega-3 fatty acids, fish oil. And if you're a vegetarian, you can get omega-3s from algae. They make algae-based EPA and DHA. The problem is it's really expensive and it's really hard.
Yeah.
So the fish oil, for example, that we make at BrainMD, it doesn't have fish proteins in it. It's just really loaded with healthy omega-3 fatty acids. Vitamin D, you should know and measure your vitamin D level, and then you should optimize it. I live in Southern California, where it's sunny 330 days a year, but my level was terrible.
Me too. I just did my most recent blood work.
And so I take 7,000 units of vitamin D every day, and my level's 80, which is good. So normal's between 30 and 100. But people who are over 40 compared to people who are under 20 have half the risk of cancer. And when you have low vitamin D, you're hungry all the time because leptin, the hormone that tells you not to eat, doesn't work in your brain. And so as soon as I increased my vitamin D intake, my appetite went away. And that helped me because, I told you I have fat people in my family and I've struggled with it my whole life. And now I don't because I'm not hungry all the time. And I make better decisions, right? Because I'm conscious, I'm purposeful about that. Other supplements then depend on your type.
I was just going to say, it's Donna Lermer. I think she should get her blood work done. What do you think?
I think everyone.
To actually know.
Don't business people teach this principle all the time. You can't change what you don't measure.
Thank you very much.
Right. You can't change what you don't measure. So everybody, every year, should get a blood work panel, a CBC, a chemistry panel, testosterone, even if you're a woman,
know your
vitamin
hormones.
D, C-reactive protein for inflammation, hemoglobin A1C, for blood sugar, which we'll talk about. Every year you should do. You should do that. And then the supplements should be based on your type. And based on the imaging, I realized a long time ago, not everybody can get a scan. So based on thousands of scans, we developed our free brain health assessment. So you can go to brainhealthassessment.com, tell you which of the 16 brain types you have.
Give us that one more time.
Brainhealthassessment.com.
Let's put that up on the screen, brainhealthassessment.com.
And it'll tell you which of the 16 types you have. Are you impulsive? Are you compulsive? Are you sad? Are you anxious? And then it'll recommend supplements targeted to your type.
Good.
And that's how I think of supplements.
I really appreciate you having that answer. I mean, there's obviously, we all know the basics, right? You got to have omegas. But I think at the end of the day, everyone listening, you've got to get your blood work done. I do it every 6 months just to see the changes. And, we live on the road, traveling, airplanes, hotels, stress, on stage for 10, 12 hours a day, grinding the way we do. I don't even use the word grinding. Like, I'm aligned with my values and my vision and my mission, right? So not grinding, but adrenals, right? My adrenals will be shot after months of traveling on the road. So now I'm taking a massive number of adrenals based upon my blood work to keep me more balanced. They got to do it.
Got to do it.
All
if
right.
you want to keep doing what you do.
All right. So I'm going to keep bouncing, and then we're going to come back to Bright Minds. Can one of his brain scans detect a brain aneurysm?
No.
Alan Emerson
it's
asked
not
that question.
the right study for that. An MRA is the right study for that. That's an MR angiogram.
Got it.
We're looking at activity and blood flow, but not individual blood vessels.
Yes. All right. How to detox mercury exposure?
Well, one, stop exposure. I was
Step one, stop. Yes.
Bayside restaurant on Sunday with my kids, and my son-in-law ordered swordfish, and he does that a lot. And I'm like, don't do that.
Yeah.
Tony Robbins came to see me because he had mercury poisoning from the insane amount of swordfish he was eating.
Yes.
And so decrease exposure. And then I'm a fan of supporting your 4 organs of detoxification. So
talk about
decrease exposure to mercury. So I don't eat tuna and I don't eat swordfish. And I had my mercury fillings out of my head.
Yep.
So, but the 4 organs of detoxification are your kidneys, so drink more water, be purposeful about that. Your gut, eat more fiber, because your gut and the microbiome, they're great at detoxifying you if you feed them right. Your liver, stop the alcohol and eat brassicas. So brassicas are detoxifying vegetables, Brussels sprouts, cauliflower, broccoli, kale, cabbage.
I love all those.
I love them, right? There's no suffering in getting well. You just have to have, you either need to know how to make them or have somebody, be nice to the person who does know how to make them.
Exactly.
And then your skin is the biggest detox organ in your body.
Yes.
And so we're totally into tea now with toxins, but take saunas, infrared saunas.
Yes.
People who take the most saunas have the lowest risk of Alzheimer's disease. So there's a study from Finland on people who took 0 to 1 a week, 2 to 3 a week, and 5 to 7 a week. And the 2 to 3 saunas a week had a 30% drop in their risk of Alzheimer's disease.
Interesting.
The people who did 5 to 7 had a 60% drop in their risk of Alzheimer's disease. So like saunas.
Yes.
And it's not just sweating, it's also increasing something called heat shock proteins that actually help your blood vessels and help detoxify your system.
What about cold plunge? What about cryo? I'm doing cryo just about every day.
And what benefit do you get from it?
Removes a lot of the aches and pains, especially post a workout. And absolutely when I'm traveling in, LA, New York, LA to London, I'll get off, do a cryo, and it just feels like it just strips away 12 hours on an airplane. So I just feel better. The aches and pains being probably the main thing. So inflammation being the second.
And you're
in
it for 2 minutes?
3 minutes. 3 minutes minus 225-ish Fahrenheit.
Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay. I have to try it.
Okay. It's cold. It's cold. It's definitely cold, but I love it. All right, so go back to toxins. I mean, this is interesting that she was asking about, in this case, mercury exposure.
We live in a toxic society. I mean, people go, why the increased incidence of ADD or why the increased incidence of autism? Autism in 1991 was 1 in 10,000 children. Now it's 1 in 55. Why? That's not a genetic change in our society. I think it's vulnerable people that are being assaulted by air pollution, water pollution, plastic pollution.
Yep.
I mean, we've seen these massive lawsuits against Roundup. $286 million a jury awarded a man. Massive lawsuits against baby powder.
Yeah.
That the plastics that we are consuming, the parabens and phthalates, they're called hormone disruptors.
Yep.
And I like this app. I have no money in the app. It's called Think Dirty. You can scan all of your personal products, and it'll tell you on a scale of 1 to 10 how quickly they're killing you. Oh. You should not be putting aluminum under your armpits every day.
Yeah.
And, there are aluminum-free deodorants that work.
Yeah.
And when I first downloaded that app and I scanned my bathroom, I threw out half of it.
Oh, easy.
So soft soap,
Yeah.
for example, on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 is good, 10 is killing you early, was a 10.
Yes.
I was horrified.
Yeah.
And now I get something off Amazon, it's made in Africa, called Alafia, and it's not very expensive, and it works. Barbasol, the shaving cream I used since I was like 14, is a 10.
Yes.
And now I get something called Kiss My Face.
Yep.
That's a 2.
From Mother's Market.
And it's a 2. And it actually is cheaper because it lasts way longer. You know, Barbasol's gone in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
This is gone in 2 months.
So you have to buy more and kill yourself faster.
And people go, oh, but it's expensive. It's like, no, it's not. But being sick is expensive. People don't get it. It's, you know, oh, I can't do that. It's too much money. It's like, come on, God gave you a big brain for a reason.
Yes.
You can figure out how to do this, because if your brain's better, you're going to make more money.
Yes.
We don't get the money thing right. People go, oh, all the doctors aren't imaging because of the money.
Yeah.
It's like, no, it's not the money, it's the mindset.
Yeah.
Got to get your mindset right.
Yeah. This group is all about that. I mean, that's why they've eaten you up every time we've done work together. So, all right, toxins. What's the next one?
So, you know, and in toxins,
you
know, it's alcohol, marijuana, any drugs of abuse, really. But it's toxic air, mold exposure.
Yes. Every real estate agent knows that one.
And it's so important. Dave Asprey and I are friends, and he first got his scan 14 years ago. His brain looked like crap. I mean, it was really
Is this when he was really
awful.
fat also?
He was,
Yeah.
and he had brain fog. It was terrible. He had mold in his house. And he had
Really?
he did a documentary I'm in called Moldy.
Okay.
And it's brilliant. It's a major cause of psychiatric problems.
Okay, I want to go on a limb here. Why is it that marijuana is now being pushed on people like alcohol and everything else? Why is that? I mean, I grew up in the day and age when, look, I mean, I tried pot when I was a kid, like, you know, like everybody else, you know, maybe everybody else growing up in my area did. But then you kind of realize, like, I think I woke up around 17 and said, every time I do this, I become a zombie. I've got way too much energy. I've got way too many things I want to do. So it just wasn't, I was easy. It wasn't my thing. And now I look at a bunch of people I know that are 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s that are taking edibles. Like it's a Tuesday night. They're dropping an edible, smoking some weed, hanging out, having a drink. And I'm questioning the sanity of it.
So let me talk about this, because I have no dog in the fight.
Yeah.
I don't have a marijuana company, and I actually make more money if you do marijuana, because you're more likely to see me.
Exactly.
So I have no dog
reality,
in the fight,
Yeah.
except I've seen 150,000 SPECT scans over the last 30 years, and the marijuana ones look older.
Yeah.
They look sicker.
Yeah.
I have so many 16-year-old patients who start smoking pot, and all of a sudden they look like they have ADD.
Yeah.
And they have no motivation. They
Yeah.
can't do school. Does it happen to everybody? No, but it happens enough that it's risky business.
Yeah.
If you smoke as a teenager's pot, it increases your risk of psychosis 450%. If you smoke as a teenager, it increases your risk of depression and suicide. One of my friends who's 76, he's been smoking for 50 years, and he came to see me. His brain looked like he was 106. I mean,
Yeah.
it really looked awful.
Yeah.
And he stopped.
Yeah.
And, you know, for about the first 2 months, he was struggling with, you know, some anxiety and insomnia. But, you know, I gave him some supplements, and now he's better than ever.
Yeah.
So it's the little lie. Now, I'm a fan, Tana's not, but I'm a fan of legalizing marijuana, because please don't put them in jail.
I agree.
You know,
I
put them
agree.
in a cage,
Yeah.
really,
Yeah.
and let them hang out with bad people and give them bad food and chronically stress them. That's not smart. But let's not say it's good for everybody. And now that it's legal in many states, there's going to be a lot of study, and a lot of the studies are already coming out and saying it's increasing the risk of suicide and depression and things like that.
Yeah. So sorry.
But is it
sorry for
worse
everybody
than
out there.
alcohol?
Yeah.
No, not really.
Yeah.
Is it worse than Xanax? No, not really. But none of those things are good for you.
That you once shared a quote, and now, of course, now I'm really going to pick at, you know, somebody's, you know, little scar here. X percentage of women under age 40 are on some kind of Xanax or something.
So 23% of women between the ages of 20 and 60 are taking antidepressant medication. It's a scandal.
Yeah.
What else is a scandal is 36% of teenage girls will struggle with major depression during their adolescence. It's insane.
Yeah.
And it's because we're working on the wrong paradigm. And in my new book, The End of Mental Illness, I have this writing device you'll like. There's a section in each chapter on if I was an evil ruler, how would I create mental illness in America? And basically, I'd create American society. I'd give everybody social media apps that make everybody else's life look amazing, and by comparison, yours sucks. I'd create the KFC hot Cheetos sandwich. There's a new sandwich by KFC. KFC hot Cheetos. Now, if you're listening to this and you're going, oh, that sounds amazing, you have work to do. Because I look at that and I'm like, that is clearly a weapon of mass destruction.
Exactly. And then here's a gun, right? It is shocking. And yet, is it supply and demand? Is it a lack of awareness? Is it a lack of discipline? I have
to tell you this story. I was in the clinic last week, and a 9-year-old boy came up to me, and he was so excited to meet me. And his mom said, could you just talk to him about screen time?
Yeah.
And his eyes went down, and I said, look at me. I said, you don't know this. I said, very few people know this. But Google and Apple and these companies hire neuroscientists. Mm-hmm. They hire neuroscientists like me to figure out how to make addictive gadgets so that they can get more mind share, more of your attention to make money.
Yep.
Don't let them do that. There's actually a book about this called Hooked, How to Create Addictive Gadgets.
Oh, yes.
And I'm not okay with that.
Yeah.
And the more time you spend on the gadgets, the more likely you are to be anxious, depressed, and overweight. And so we have to be careful. My grandson, my oldest grandson, he came out of the womb addicted to the iPhone. And when he gets screen time, his tics go up. Mm-hmm. He gets these blinky things in his face. It's like, no, these things we need to be thoughtful, careful. And allowing children to play, these violent video games, Grand Theft Auto, that's abuse.
It's shocking. And I know someone's going to say, okay, someone's going to be listening like, these two righteous son of a bitches, like, what are they talking about? And yet all I would say is look around at society, right? I mean, I don't think we're being righteous in any way, shape, or form. I think you have such a caring for human beings. Look at the work you did with
evil ruler.
Yeah, if I was an evil
I'd create Fox News and CNN if I was an evil ruler. Because what did they do? They focus on what's wrong,
and they
get people to fight with each other.
Yes.
And I got to do Hannity, and I don't know if I got to do Hannity or
you were sentenced to
do Hannity, and I've done him twice, and one was actually really good. I did it with Pastor Warren on our work on the Daniel Plan.
Yes.
But the other, it was just, why are we yelling at each other, and why are we fighting?
Yeah.
Right? To pit people against each other, which is what's happening in our society, increases the incidence of mental illness. And we have to be more thoughtful. We have to be more careful. And I'm coming up with the evil ruler card game.
I think it's fantastic. All right. I actually want you to switch gears. You talked about the Daniel Plan, and I was actually in the gym this morning, and then again with my my active release therapist. I had quite the morning. Gym, active release therapist, stretching, and then cryo, and then you and I. So it's been a brain active morning. In the gym, talking with my buddy, we're talking about the Daniel Plan and the impact of that. And I'm starting to tell the story, but you could tell it way better. You said, I'm sitting at church with my wife. You know the story I'm talking about? Tell that, please.
So I just finished my book, Change Your Brain, Change Your Body. And so it's my second book on the connection between physical health and mental health. And it was a Sunday morning. I was just so happy.
Yeah.
And we went to Mariners. That's where we were going at the time, which is a big church in Newport Beach. And I said, why don't you drop Chloe off at Children's Church? So she was 6 at the time. I'll go save us seats. And as I walked toward the sanctuary, there are hundreds of donuts for sale.
For
charity. And I've seen the donuts since I was a little boy.
Yeah.
But that day they pissed me off.
Yeah.
And I actually remember I took a picture of them because I'm not happy. And right around the donuts are bacon and sausage cooking on the grill. And now I'm really not happy because bacon has all sorts of bad things in it for you. And then as I walked in the sanctuary, off to the side, they were cooking hot dogs for after church. And I'm thinking, I'm going to church to get my soul fed. These bastards are trying to kill me.
Yeah.
And
They're trying to get you to heaven sooner.
And as I sat down, the minister started talking about the ice cream festival the night before. And I'm furious at this point. And I'm not like that. I'm not all reactive emotionally, generally. I'm furious. And so when Tana finds me in church, I'm typing on my phone. And she hates that. And she gave me that look.
Oh, yeah.
That
what are you doing on your phone in church?
Only your wife can give you. And so I showed her what I was writing. Go to church, get donuts, hot dogs, bacon, sausage, ice cream. They have no idea they are sending people to heaven early. Save them, then kill them.
Yes.
This is not the plan.
Yes.
And I prayed that Sunday that God would use me to change the culture of food at church. No lie.
Yeah.
2 weeks later, Rick Warren called me. He's the senior pastor at Saddleback Church. He was on the cover of Time magazine twice as America's pastor. He's the author of The Purpose-Driven Life, 50 million copies worldwide. And he said, I'm fat. My church is fat. Will you help me? And together with my friend Mark Hyman, we created the Daniel Plan that has now been done in thousands of churches around the world.
Any optics on or data around how much weight has been lost because of that?
Well, the first year, they lost 250,000 pounds, so the same as the space shuttle. But weight loss was really the side effect.
Sure.
It was people got off their medicine. There was better memory, better energy, less pain. The stories of transformation are
That's what it's all about.
spectacular.
Yeah, I mean, that's what, what drives you. The stories,
It's
right?
the stories.
It's the healing. It's people getting better. I look at my own situation and just that experience. It's all I want to do is share you with everybody afterwards. Remember we did the Facebook Live, sitting in your office, and you had all of the NFL brain specs sitting in front of us. Talk about that just for a second, because anybody that saw the movie Will Smith Concussion, they experienced a bit of you inside of that.
Well, I was a consultant on the movie. I was actually written into it as Hope and written out of it, so I know what that's like. But in 2007, Anthony Davis came to see me. He's the Hall of Fame running back from USC. So people in Southern California will know him. He's a local hero. He's called the Notre Dame Killer because in 1972 he scored 6 touchdowns against the University of Notre Dame.
I got goosebumps.
And but in 2007, he had memory problems, temper problems. He had periods of confusion. He's on the 405 freeway, and he has no idea where he's going. He had to actually pull off.
Yeah.
And one of the pharmacists at USC recommended he come see me. And at 54, his brain looked like he was 85, and bad for 85.
Yeah.
He clearly had traumatic brain injury. And I put him on multiple vitamin, fish oil, brain boost. Taught him those 3 things: brain envy, avoid things that hurt it, do things that help it. And within 3 months, he's radically better. And he's so excited that he's like, Doc, we have to tell people. And so he wrote to the commissioner about we need to work on rehabilitating brain trauma. Commissioner never wrote him back because they were in full-on denial at the problem. But in January 2009, we started our study. We partnered with the NFL Players Association, and we've scanned and treated 300 NFL players.
Wow.
And within 2 months, 80% of our players get better when we do that. We put them on the supplements, and we teach them about brain health. And I have cool players like Terry Bradshaw and Rosie Greer and Jack Youngblood. Legends. And the idea behind this study is, yes, playing football causes long-term brain damage. Don't lie about it. And I don't think parents should be signing consent forms for their children because the children's brains are not finished developing. How do you really give consent that this could actually impact your ability to be a good dad or your ability to be a good mom or your ability to, it's just the facts that football causes long-term brain damage. But if you're going to play, and one of my players just signed an $88 million deal, if you're going to play, you should be putting your brain in a healing environment. You should be rehabbing it every day.
Yeah. Talk about, you sent me to this place, and it was for me, it was painful, but it was sitting in that oxygen chamber for an hour at a time. I think I did it 5 or 6 times. It was extraordinary, right? Obviously the benefits, all part of sort of my healing process, but talk about that just for a second.
So one of my favorite treatments for traumatic brain injury is hyperbaric oxygen. If you have low blood flow to your brain, I'm going to want to put you in a chamber because more oxygen under pressure increases the oxygen to your brain. It also increases stem cell production.
Yes.
And it promotes healing. And the 5 concussions you had were wounds.
Yes.
And hyperbaric oxygen is actually approved by Medicare for 14 wound healing indications. And I think anybody that's had a stroke should probably be in a hyperbaric chamber.
Yeah.
Now, we don't have the Lazarus treatment to bring the dead back to life, but we can get the struggling better.
Yes.
And too often people who have neurodegenerative diseases like strokes or Parkinson's, people just, all they do is they're like sheep, and that they follow, I'm taking this medicine or that, and the neurologist is not talking to them about, well, we need to change your diet. We need to put your brain in a healing environment because it's dying on you. And there's so little of that going on just because of how medicine has changed since I've been a doctor. As a psychiatrist, I used to get an hour with people.
Yeah.
And now it's just turned into 15-minute med checks, and I have no interest in that.
Yeah.
And people go, but that's what they reimburse. It's like, well, so what? Be good enough. People want to come see you and pay you.
Yes.
It's like, don't just go with the flow because the flow is toxic.
Yeah. Your dad called you a maverick, or was it your mom?
It was my dad.
Yeah.
And to him, that was not a
And that was
good
not
thing.
the positive maverick we're talking
Except
about.
if we have time, he's my best story.
Okay, you should. So I'm doing plank this morning for 3 minutes,
Good
and
job.
I am focused, and that for me that's a lot. But I'm thinking about your dad, and I'm thinking that son of a bitch is doing 6 minute, 7 minute planks. So tell that story.
He texts me.
Yeah.
He actually did it. He texted me yesterday with, the time that he was able to do a plank.
Tell him how old your dad is. Yeah.
He's 90.
90.
And he and I never really got along very well because there was like no bonding. He was not a great dad, right?
Yeah.
He never went to one of my Little League games or basketball games. And I was bitter about that. It's like the only time I see you is when I'm working. What's that about?
Yeah.
But over time, I realize he's a product of his environment.
Exactly.
And he is the American dream. He was chairman of the board of Unified Grocers, which is a $4 billion company before they were acquired. And he's really smart and really special.
Yes.
But he would never listen to me. When I told him in 1979 that I wanted to be a psychiatrist, he asked me why I didn't want to be a real doctor.
Yeah.
Why I wanted to be a nut doctor and hang out with nuts all day long.
Yeah.
So you don't get Father of the Year award.
Saying those kind of things.
And then when I realized I had to get healthy, and then I encouraged him because I love him, it's like, now you're a health nut.
Yeah.
What's with you and the nuts is what he said. But when he was 85, he had mold in his house, and he developed a chronic cough, and then a heart arrhythmia, and then heart failure. And I thought we were going to lose him. And he got depressed. First time in his life, he got depressed. And he's sitting in a chair.
Was this in the year 85 or when he was 85?
When he was 85 years old.
That's what I thought.
Right? So it's really never too late.
Yeah, this is 5 years ago.
He looked at me, and he was so sad. And he said, I'm sick of being sick. What do you want me to do?
Yeah.
And he's so stubborn.
Yeah.
He did everything.
Yes.
Right? So those of you going, oh my God, this is a lot. He's like, bring it on.
Yeah.
He said, I don't want to feel this way anymore. Because
Yes.
he wasn't going to work, and he'd been going to work for 70 years. That's who he is.
Yeah.
And so he completely changed his diet immediately. And I have 6 siblings, and they're like, oh, you don't have to be as serious as Danny is.
Yeah.
And he's like, no. He said, you should listen to him. You're fat.
Yeah.
That's what he'd do with my siblings. And they'd text me like, tell him to leave us alone. I'm like, absolutely not. And because I'm not the lever person in my family.
Who is?
My dad is the lever
Yeah.
person. And so he eats right. We start working out. And he's 85 years old. 3 pounds.
Yeah.
Then 6 pounds.
Yeah.
Then 12 pounds. Then 20 pounds. We worked out last Sunday. He lifted over 20,000 pounds during our set. Right. I mean, he can pull down 100 pounds and do it 60 times. He's a beast.
That's
and then
at
when
90.
And
at
within
90.
6 months, he lost 40 pounds.
Yeah.
He lost his heart failure. He got the mold taken care of. He's got more energy. And my promise to him at 90, and now he's 90, you'll be better than when you're 70. And he just brags about how strong he is.
Oh, yeah.
And then, you know, because we'd always compete doing planks. And at 2 minutes, I'm like, okay, this is enough. I don't believe in suffering.
Yeah.
And my cousin challenged him. And she went a minute. He went 6.
That just drives me nuts. I know Jeff Mays, one of our coaches, is listening right now. Jeff Mays, I call you out. 6-minute plank. Wow. All right, let's finish the bright minds. So we said blood flow, retirement and aging, right? Inflammation, genetics, head trauma, toxins. So talk to us about.
So just one simple thing is
please.
exercise for blood flow, new learning for retirement and aging, omega-3 fatty acids and get your gut right, genes, know what's in your family and be serious to prevent it, head trauma, stop texting while you're driving.
Yes.
Don't be reading your phone while you're walking down the stairs. When you're walking and you think the car sees you, make sure you have that person's eyes because they very well may be distracted, right? Toxins, just avoid things that hurt your brain. The M is mindstorms. It's these electrical storms that go on in your brain that often trigger panic attacks, emotional reactions, aggression, and
what's the
so
cause
on.
of that? I've never heard that before. Mindstorms.
So head trauma can do it. Genetics can do it. But it's the storms. And that's why we often use anti-seizure medicines to calm down the storm. But you know, the biggest trigger is fluorescent lights and sugar. So if you have low sugar, your brain is likely to get irritable and you're more likely to react in a way that you shouldn't. So it's basically a higher protein, lower simple carbohydrate diet that helps to stabilize how your brain fires. The I is immunity and infections, so common, like things like Lyme disease, herpes, Epstein-Barr, people who had mononucleosis. Those things can reemerge. So if your mind is not getting right doing simple things, somebody should check you for infections. I have this great story. I get a text every day about noon from this girl's mother, Adriana's mother. How can I pray for you today?
That's beautiful.
And when she was 16, when Adriana was 16, her family went to Yosemite. And when they went to their cabin, they were surrounded by 6 deer. And they thought it was a magical moment. 10 days later, she starts hallucinating. She becomes aggressive, she's paranoid, and she's hospitalized at Kaiser. They diagnose her with schizophrenia. The medicine doesn't work. She goes to Stanford. The doctor at Stanford told the mother she was in denial, that Adriana's going to need to be on this medicine for the rest of her life, at which point she brought her to our Northern California clinic. Her brain's on fire. And they're like, why is her brain on fire? She had Lyme disease from the deer tick.
Wow.
And Lyme, there's a new book about this called Bitten, that Lyme was actually developed as a biological weapon and by accident got released in the Northeast. But if you look at the map of the United States, the highest incidence of schizophrenia, which is a very severe mental illness, it's the Northeast, the upper Midwest, and the West Coast. And if
I was thinking cold, and then you lost me at West Coast.
West Coast. If you overlay on that map the highest incidence of Lyme, they're identical.
Interesting.
So on an antibiotic, Adriana got her brain back, got her life back. She recently graduated from Pepperdine and then the University of London with a master's degree. Normal, beautiful. So the doctor at Stanford, I have problems with this. You're going to have to do this for the rest of your life. Never having looked at her brain or screened her for all the potential causes of psychosis and losing your mind. I'm not okay with that.
No.
And I'm never going to be okay
No.
with that. We need to change the paradigm, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to do that.
Thank you.
And that's why, Deb, Adriana's mother, prays for me, because it's a big mission.
Yeah. Go back to fluorescent lights. A good friend of mine, Mark Davison from 1000 Watt, who's just this creative branding genius, comes to my office, I don't know, a month and a half ago, and he walks in and he puts on these yellow, it looks like hunting kind of glasses, right? That
Blue light
yellow,
blockers.
yeah. And he said, I can't do the lights. It just impacts me in so many bad ways. And we didn't go into it. I just said, it's just another cool thing that Mark does, whatever. So what is that? Fluorescent lights, what should we be doing?
We should replace them when we can with grow lights that have full spectrum lights, because the fluorescent light's not for everybody, but for some people agitates them and irritates them and gives them headaches. There's an interesting syndrome I talk about in my new book called the Irlen syndrome, I-R-L-E-N. And these are people that light really disrupts their brain. They have depth perception problems, so they have trouble catching balls. They have, you see them at the mall. These are people who have a terrible time getting on escalators. So most of us just walk on. But these people stand at the bottom and then they watch. And then with a lot of anxiety, they get on because their depth perception is not right, because light is interfering with some of the pathways in their brain. Depth perception, headaches, especially when they read. They're often anxious. They look like they have ADD. And when they read, words move on the page. So either blurry, halo, words move. And when they put on colored filtered lenses, all of it goes away. And the Irlen syndrome is very common after head trauma. And so the treatment is colored filtered lenses. Some of my NHL players, because I have a number of NHL players, actually one of them just won the Stanley Cup, he wears a tinted mask because he's a better hockey player.
For sure.
Because his depth perception is right. So if you have headaches, if you have night driving problems, and there's a self-test on the Irlen website, irlen.com. It's miraculous for the people who have it. The colored lenses. My sister-in-law, who we talked about, the one who had problems with addiction, she also had 19 car accidents. And she was embarrassed to tell me. She said, I see these blue halos around things. She thought I was going to think she was psychotic. Yeah. And she had the worst case of Irlen I'd ever seen. And we screened her, treated her, and now she's just so much better.
So let's go back to this mindstorm thing is fantastic. Okay, what's the I?
Immunity and infections.
Okay.
So we want to strengthen your immune system. Think vitamin D, get your gut right again. And if your brain is going the wrong way, someone should screen you for things like Lyme and herpes, this thing called toxoplasmosis, which toxoplasmosis is a parasite that you get from cats, from stray cats, that, and the story is really funny, that this parasite actually infects lots of different animals, but it can only sexually reproduce in rats. And so when it infects a rat, it turns the rat into a cat-seeking missile. So it actually works on the dopamine centers of the rat's brain to love cat urine. And so when it smells cat urine, it goes toward it rather than away from it.
Fascinating.
And the cat eats the rat. Toxo gets to have sex and reproduce. So it's the classic tale of eat, pray, love.
Just in a really bad way.
Just in a really bad way. And it's one of the causes of suicide. And it's one of the causes of psychosis. Easy to call people bad, harder to go. Why?
So what about things like echinacea? Like I do a ton of echinacea. Do you know Dr. Schultz? Is that Richard Schultz? That ring a bell from Santa Monica? He's like the the guy that my wife studied, back in the early 90s, like he was the one that you went to and said, okay, I've got an ulcer coming out of my body that's the size of a basketball, and the doctors basically said, go home and die.
Right.
And he would say, well, why don't we instead flush out your entire body and do, a 6-week detox? We're going to do enemas every day. We're just going to clean you out. And people get freaked out when we say that stuff. But, he would literally say, you're full of shit. He created an echinacea product that I've used for years, right? Superfoods, green foods, all this kind of stuff. So any input on that? I'm just thinking about like building
whatever
up our
you
immune
can
system.
do to build your immune system, you want to do it. Mm-hmm. And colorful plants is the best way, along with getting rid of the things that hurt your microbiome, just like we talked about.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So what's the end?
Neurohormone deficiencies, so important. Low thyroid, low testosterone, low DHEA, growth hormone, all of these things, they're neurohormones. I'm in a new movie, hopefully it'll be released this fall, called Quiet Explosions with my friend Mark Gordon. And we take 10 people who have serious brain problems, either emotional problems or head trauma. One big wave surfer, Sean Dollar's in it, Mark Rippon, who's the Super Bowl MVP quarterback from the Redskins. And we do our magic with them. And the stories are just so beautiful about how your brain can heal. And one of the primary interventions is testing your hormones. You can't change
your blood
what
work.
Don't measure, and then optimizing them either with precursors or the hormones actually themselves. I think of them as miracle grow for your brain. And if they're not optimal, you're not optimal. Because I can have a normal testosterone level for 65-year-old, but do I really want that?
No, no.
And I don't want a 15-year-old's level because
hey.
No, I don't want that. But I'm okay with a 40-year-old level, right? Where I have energy and strength and vitality. I'm not okay with doing what is normal because normal, quite frankly, sucks.
I agree.
Especially for my age.
Yeah. Well, for my age, I'll be 50 in T-minus 13 months. And I started doing, looking at my hormones when I was 40, trying to figure out, why am I tired all the time? That was my, why am I tired? And it was Brad Davidson, right? Our mutual friend Brad, who said, well, when was the last time you had your blood work done? I'm like, probably not since 1997. He's like, yeah, we might want to do that. As soon as I saw my blood, I was like, okay, it's obvious what I have to do.
What most people don't know is concussions damage the pituitary gland, which is the master hormone gland.
Interesting.
And often you get this, all of them are low. And so I want to know what's optimal. Because I want to be my optimal self, not my predicted self or my normal self. Because normal in this country is sick. If you're blessed to live to 85, like my dad, you have a 50% risk of having dementia. You have a 1 in 2 chance of having lost your mind. I'm not okay with that.
No.
And, in the next 5 years, I'll be 70. I'm not okay with a 70% chance of having erectile dysfunction. I'm not okay with that. No. So if you're not okay with that, then none of these interventions we've talked about today are hard. None of these are hard unless you're okay with the status quo.
Okay, I'm going to switch gears before we do the D and the S. Neuralink. What do you think about Neuralink, the new company that Elon Musk has put together?
I'm skeptical of all these things that say they can read your mind and that mind to mind can happen through a computer. I think it makes great fiction. I haven't seen anything that shows this is going to be ready for prime time in my lifetime. We'll see.
I think they said 2035.
I'll still be around.
Yeah, we'll be around. But just conceptually, the thought of putting in a supercomputer into my brain, I think I would be one of the first to line up for it and say, let's go for it. There's just something about that. Maybe I can't think of the name of the movie, but the handsome actor who takes the pill, who goes from being a loser to being the most.
Oh, Bradley Cooper. And
Limitless, right? I mean, I look at that and go, I'd take that pill right? Like there's just something
So
about
you want
I
to
text
do
you,
it like
brain optimization.
10 years after.
Yeah.
Let them perfect it before, because, so many of the medicines,
Yes.
I learned this, because I was like a young resident.
Yeah.
New medicine.
Yes.
Better science. And then 4 years later, they're like, this causes seizures. You need to not do that.
Yes.
So some caution.
I know.
What do they call them? I'm an early adopter with
So am I.
imaging. But from everything else, I'm sort of the next stage.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right, I'm not the dinosaur, but which gets us to D, which is diabesity.
There we go. Say the word again.
Diabesity.
What is that?
It's a combination of being diabetic or pre-diabetic and being overweight or obese.
Got it.
50% of the American population is diabetic or pre-diabetic.
That is
It's
insane.
That's a study from JAMA, the Journal of the American Medical Association. 14% of us have diabetes, 36% are pre-diabetic. And as your blood sugar goes up, atrophy of your brain goes up too. It's not a good thing.
Yeah.
Blood sugar is a disaster.
Is this just the fast food, revolution of America?
It's that and toxins. There's a great book called The Toxin Solution, and he actually argues that toxins are a bigger cause of diabetes than obesity, but neither one of them is good for you. And then 70% of us are overweight, 40% of us are obese. It's the biggest brain drain in the history of the United States. I published 2 studies. As your weight goes up, the size and function of your brain goes down.
I'm just finally saying, if you haven't read this book, everyone that's looking, this is the book that changed it all for me. And I'm sorry, I'm interrupting, but like this is it. Like if they just go back to these core principles, just while we're here, just because since school is right around the corner.
Change your brain, change your grades.
Can you talk about this just for a second? I know we're talking about all the unhealthy people out there, but talk about this just for a second, right? You just sent me this. I started scanning it. I've got a kid going into college. I got a kid going into his second year of college. And I'm thumbing through this and I'm feeling like a bad dad. Like I should have been doing things differently is what was going through my head.
Well, what is the organ of learning? It's your
brain.
brain. If you don't focus on getting your brain right, you're going to have a harder time. And if they have to repeat or take an extra year of college, that's like $60,000 or more than that.
Exactly.
And so first thing, get your brain right, your mind will follow. And so change your brain, change your grades, teaches kids how to love their brain, get it right. And then there's practical stuff. Because I was actually not a very good student in high school because I was distracted and working. And I was a phenomenal student in college because I learned how to do it. Like you have to show up and you have to be nice to the teacher. And one of the secrets from the book is if you read what they're going to talk about in class ahead of time, it's a triple benefit. Because one, you're getting exposed to words and things you don't know and concepts. The teacher's going to reinforce it. You're also going to ask more intelligent questions. And so once you get your brain right, it's then a strategy on how you can excel, even in hard classes like calculus and anatomy and physiology and so on.
Yes. All the ones that my boys are like, oh, I'm not sure if I want to be a doctor anymore.
Right.
Dad, talk to me about getting my real estate license. All right. Back to any other thoughts on it? So say it for me again. Diabesity?
Diabesity.
I want to make sure I'm saying
that
right.
So it's this combination. So this is where your toxins, you want to detox your body, but you got to get your food right. And people go, you should have 5 servings of fruits and vegetables a day. In my mind, I think you should have 9.
Wow.
Because you will actually poop more and you will have more nutrients because the nutrients really do come from plants. And so we have all sorts of recipes and things. And
your wife wrote a book on this? Or a book or 2.
Tana wrote a number of cookbooks. Brain Warrior's Way is her favorite one.
That was a great book, by the way. Great. Yeah, everyone check that one out as well.
And then the S is sleep. When you don't sleep, it actually turns off 700 health-promoting genes and makes you more likely to be sick.
What's the optimal number of hours we should be asleep?
For most people, it's about 7.5 because we have these 90-minute cycles. So people go 8 hours.
Yeah.
It's like, no, people sleep 8 hours. They generally wake up foggy.
Yeah.
So it's about 7.5. On average, in 1900, we got 9 hours of sleep at night.
Yeah.
And now we get 6.5. And you can't go through that kind of change in such a short period of time without a dramatic negative impact on our society.
Absolutely. I'm actually on my sleep cycle app right now. I'm tracking, I'm on night number 2032, and I'm at 7 hours and 5 minutes on average of sleep.
Yeah. So I would say that's great
Yeah.
because you love your brain.
Absolutely. And I know if I get that rest, it's when you feel good, you perform good. It's that simple.
Well, and
right?
when you
and I
sleep-
need the rest to feel good.
We just learned this, that when you sleep, your brain cleans or washes itself. And we didn't know that before,
Yeah.
that actually you have this called a glymphatic system. You know, we have lymphatic
Yes.
system throughout
Yeah.
our body, but not in our brain. And so they thought our brain just didn't have one.
Yes.
But they found it recently. Isn't that amazing that we just found something that we didn't know?
And it's the
Glymphatic system,
And it washes
which
the brain.
washes the brain, but it only turns on when you're asleep.
Yes.
So it's sort of like trickles during the day and turns on at night.
Yes.
And so if you're not sleeping, trash builds up, making it harder for you to think and increasing your risk of Alzheimer's disease. So, for example, Winston Churchill and Margaret Thatcher only slept 4 hours a night, and both of them died with dementia.
Yes.
Which is interesting. But, you know, the reason I like Bright Minds so much is it really is our integrative medicine program to keep your brain healthy for the rest of your life.
Yes.
And I initially developed it for memory, and then I went, oh, this is depression rescue. This is addiction rescue.
Yes.
This is
Yeah.
how do I keep my brain? We end mental illness. So the end of mental illness begins with brain health.
I love it. I love it. All right, rapid fire Q&A from some other people on Instagram. Let's see. We talked about that one. Best tips for recovering from concussion. Let's go here. So my new trainer of the last couple of years, Richard Farley Jr., big shout out to Rich, says, what are the top 3 things I can do to start immediately optimizing my brain health? I mean, you've given 100.
Well,
top
the
3.
the first one is every day. Just start asking yourself, is this good for my brain or bad for it? I mean,
Yeah.
that's the big one. And then you just have to know the list.
Yes.
The second thing that I do every day is when I wake up, I say to myself, it's actually on the top of my to-do list, is today is going to be a great day.
Yeah.
And the reason I do that is because then my brain will find out why today is going to be a great day. And I have like a really busy day today. And I'm like, today is going to be a great day. And I get to
Yes.
hang out with you.
Yep.
And I get to do some other things. I'm going to see my grandchildren tonight.
Yeah.
Rather than feel overwhelmed, my brain directs.
Change your focus, change your life. Yeah.
And then I take my supplements in the morning.
Yeah.
I just do it.
Yep.
Right. And for me, I'm not like a 3 times a day person because I'm busy. I take them in the morning.
Yeah.
And it's, for me, it's an act of service to myself.
Yes. I'm at 2 times a day, right? I take my focus formula in the morning. I take my, I do all my vitamin D stuff after I've had lunch, right? I do enzymes also right before I eat. And I do the omegas throughout the day. This one's interesting. This is actually from one of my great coaches and a phenomenal business person. Doug Edrington says, parents assume life decisions have already paved the road and it's too late to change. Is that true?
Absolutely not.
We talked about it certainly with genetics, but maybe speak to that. So parents assume life decisions have already paved the road. Is it too late to change?
We talked about how my 85-year-old dad
Thank you.
is better at 90.
Yes.
But my next book that I'm going to work on is called Personalized Parenting. It's parenting to your child's brain type.
Ooh, interesting.
But there is so much to talk about with parenting. And I'm a huge fan of Love and Logic, Parenting with Love and Logic. Jim Fay, who wrote that, he and I are friends. He actually he's 80 and he struggled with his memory, came to see me. And his book was so helpful for Tana to not kill Chloe that I'm like, you have to stay with me. And we became really close friends. His brain is better, so that's happy.
Yeah.
But it's the one thing about parenting that's so important is you want to let your children make and pay for mistakes when the cost is cheap.
That's big. I was wondering where you were going with that.
When the cost is high. So if a 6-year-old forgets his homework, you don't take it to school. If a 6-year-old forgets his lunch, you don't take it to school. You teach them to be responsive. My favorite story is when Chloe was 7, they were fighting about homework every night, and I'm like, don't do that. I'm a child psychiatrist, but of course she's not listening to me. She came and announced to Chloe, I'm never going to help you with your homework again or tell you to do it unless you ask for help.
Yeah.
And Chloe got very suspicious.
Yes.
And she stormed upstairs and she said, I never said I wasn't going to do it. I'm just not going to do it now. And Tana backed off and left all the anxiety with Chloe. Chloe's now a junior in high school, straight A student. She holds the anxiety for her life and the decisions for her life, rather than the helicopter parent who is just angry and upset and
all the time
trying to control. Love parenting with love and logic.
Personal responsibility. Okay, so my producer has 2 questions. So Rich, fire away. I've got your note here.
Earlier you mentioned when you were talking about Tom's scans, diet, exercise, blood flow were like great treatments. But I'm also curious about one thing you mentioned when you talked about early trauma in life. What about talking about it? Like, does talking to a therapist help?
It's a great question. And talking to a therapist can be very effective when your brain works right. And so trying to do software programming on a brain that has hardware problems is really hard.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
100%.
And so, you know, we could have put you on the couch and done that. And I'm a huge fan of psychotherapy. It's so much more effective if your hippocampus works right.
Yes.
So you can remember what happens and you don't have to fight the mood instability and the irritability. And so, but once the brain works right, it still needs to be programmed.
Yes.
Right? And so often we live in an undisciplined thinking world. So, you know, whether it's politicians, the level of cognitive undiscipline is just insane. I'm so unhappy about that. And so here's the exercise. Whenever you feel sad, or you feel mad, or you feel nervous or out of control, 1, did you sleep? How's your blood sugar? Did you eat? And write down what you're thinking. And then ask yourself if it's true, right? I want people to think about their thoughts.
Yes.
Now, once your brain is right, and you still find these periods of anxiety or depression, well, then we want to see what's the emotional bridge to that. Is that bridged back to abandonment issues? Is it bridged back to abuse or anxiety because you were raised in an alcoholic home? I studied children and grandchildren of alcoholics because my first wife grew up in a severely abusive alcoholic home. And I was just wondering, why are you mad at me all the time?
Yes.
Right? So 1, you have to get her brain right because she's in a bad car accident. 2, the therapy can be so helpful. But most people don't think of, I need to do therapy after I balance my brain.
Yeah.
And so they go and they waste a lot of time.
Well, it's taking hormones without checking your blood first. Right?
Why
it
would
just,
you do that?
I mean, it doesn't make sense.
And no couples therapist
Yeah.
looks at people's brains before they do therapy.
Yes.
And how do you know if they have bipolar disorder, they had a head trauma, they have ADD, they have toxic exposure? I have this one case, I'm getting ready to film my 14th public television special.
Congratulations.
And I tell this story of Bonnie and Dave who failed marital therapy. Their therapist gave them an F.
Ouch.
After 3 years, $25,000, they said, I can't help you anymore. You guys should get divorced.
3 years and how many sessions?
Yeah. And he had all these diagnoses, mixed personality disorder with narcissistic and antisocial features, ADHD, bipolar disorder. Medicines didn't work. But they wanted to be married, so they got mad at the therapist, and the therapist said, well, I know this doctor in Costa Mesa who takes care of difficult people. Sent him to see us.
You guys are nuts. Yeah.
And his brain was toxic. He just had these big holes in it. And I'm like, And it looked like a drug addict's brain.
Yeah.
Except he said he never did drugs and didn't drink. And what's the first thing we learn in psychiatry school about drug addicts? Is they lie. Mm-hmm. They lie a lot. So in front of his wife, I'm like, is that true? You don't do drugs and you've never drank. And he said, Dr. Amen, I have many problems. That's not it. And so I looked at the wife and said, is that true? And she said, oh, yes. He's never done drugs, doesn't drink. He's just an asshole.
Yeah. Yeah.
But in my head, I'm like, why does his brain look like crap?
Exactly.
And so I went through the differential diagnosis, environmental toxin, severe hypothyroidism, a near drowning episode, because any loss of oxygen damages your brain and infection. And so I said, where do you work? He said, I work in a furniture factory. I said, what do you do? He said, I finish furniture all day long. He was doing drugs. Yes. He was doing the worst drug of abuse, which is inhaling organic solvents. Mm-hmm. And I then looked to the wife and I said, so when did he become an asshole? And she said, what do you mean? I said, did you marry him that way? Mm-hmm. Do you have father issues you're trying to work out? And she said, no. Mm-hmm. He was great. It wasn't until about 5 years ago, and then the light bulb went on. She said, oh my God. About the time he took this job, his behavior started to change. Yeah. So in his attempt, if you play this out, in his attempt to be a good husband, by going to work and supporting his family, he's being poisoned.
And becoming a horrible husband.
And being a horrible husband. And so she could have divorced him. Mm-hmm. He would have had no psychological resources because his brain was terrible. Yep. He could have killed himself or killed his family, right? We see these stories all the time.
Tragic.
And no one's thinking about what's going on in the brain.
Yes.
It's insane.
How about that for an answer? What's your second question?
So when it comes to changing patterns, changing beliefs, tapping into the unconscious mind, if you want to change something, it usually takes either a very traumatic event, something very dramatic, or it's repetition. And the third option may be hypnotherapy. So what are your thoughts on that?
So I'm a huge fan of hypnotherapy. In fact, if I didn't find the brain scans, that would have been my legacy. My first professional papers were on hypnosis. So I like getting people into a trance-like state where their mind is more open. And I have great stories of taking them back to when their symptoms first began. So I think people change when they're in pain, just like you said. A lot of people change because they're super smart and they go, oh, this makes sense to me. I need to do this differently. So sometimes they'll make big changes like my dad did. He was in pain. Sometimes they'll make these small incremental changes. But hypnosis can be very powerful.
We talk a lot about morning routines. What would you say is the ideal evening routine for someone that has a healthy brain?
I think it's turning off the gadgets, or at least if you won't, put blue light blockers on so they don't mess up your melatonin. Mm-hmm. Before I go to bed at night, I say a prayer, and then I review my day looking for what went well today, because that will actually set my dreams up to be more positive, which is what I want. I want to have more dreams because then you're in REM sleep, which is the restorative sleep, but I want to set them up. And just for people who have nightmares, my niece, who came from this terrible abusive environment, she had nightmares when she first came to see. I said, I want you to write them down, and then I want you to write a new ending to the nightmare.
Yes.
And she was always being abandoned, and so she wrote the ending of being rescued. And it was great because the nightmares went away. So don't eat 3 hours before bed. So this thing, intermittent fasting, I don't know if you do that. I do that every day pretty much. I go 12 to 16 hours. And don't eat, because people who have nighttime eating have a higher incidence of strokes and heart attacks. Because when you calm down to go to bed, your blood pressure actually drops a little bit. If you eat right before bed, it increases your blood pressure 10 to 15%, which then puts you at risk for stroke and heart attack.
Love it. Okay, this has been insanely great. I have like 3 pages of notes, right? And we're right on track on our time. Tell people, how can they find you? How can they reach you? I mean, I'm sure they just Google your name. They're going to find you everywhere. But what are some things that they can do with your firm? If they want to get a brain spec, if they want to go to the site you said earlier, Brain Health, what was it?
Brainhealthassessment.com. So they can learn about their brain type.
Yep.
They can learn about Amen Clinics. I have 8 clinics around the country, soon to be 9.
Congrats.
AmenClinics.com. BrainMD Health is our supplement and information product business in Amen University. So if they liked our discussion,
yes, and they want to go deeper,
we have a brain health coaching certification course that we have 3,000 members in. Amen University is a great resource as well.
Yeah, you're a special human being, my friend. As we wrap, absolutely. Okay, so one more time, the new book is coming out in March.
It's called The End of Mental Illness.
Okay, so
how neuroscience is transforming psychiatry to prevent or reverse anxiety, depression, bipolar, ADHD, and more.
So when you go out on tour, we'll have to make sure we do a little live show and make sure all of our friends know about it. Everybody watching, this is the book you absolutely should start with. I'd love this one for everybody with kids. I don't care what age they are, to help them get right and ready. What's this one?
Feel Better Fast and Make It Last is, when I was thinking about what I wanted to write, no one has ever come to me and said they wanted to feel better slowly. It's like, what's instant gratification?
Exactly.
We live in an instant gratification society.
Push a button,
so
magic happens.
The book is about what are those things that I do that help me feel better now, but not later, versus now and later. And it's structured in such a beautiful way. I've actually done it in businesses where we teach how do you have a better brain, how do you have a better mind, how do you have better attachments, how do you have more purpose and inspiration, how do you get your food right, and ultimately you do all of it not because you should, but because you love yourself.
And a lot of this is just coming from that the Stanford Persuasive Tech Lab you mentioned earlier
with Tiny Habits.
There's
all sorts of tiny
habits, right? I love that. All right, so Rich, thank you for those little bonus questions. Daniel, thank you so much for coming in and spending time with us. This has been just very, very in-depth. The brain, this whole conversation, right? Going through the bright minds, having everybody just go back through each and every one of those and look at maybe where you can make an adjustment, whether it's big or small. Just this is going to be transformative
that's
for people.
A lot, but it's like know your risk factors.
Yes.
Know which of these are yours.
Yes.
Go after those first.
100%. 100%. Thank you, my friend. I really appreciate you, always.
Thanks, Sam.
Well, my friend, that was certainly a lot of information. And if you're like me, I was taking notes. I've got 3 or 4 pages of notes in front of me because of every time I spend with Daniel, it is like that reminder to love your brain and to avoid things that hurt your brain and do more things that make your brain healthy. So I hope you got a ton of value with this. I hope you reach out to his organization. And if you are like many of my personal clients that have gone and done the brain spec, that's awesome. Make sure you tell me all about it. Shoot me an email, send me a text, send me a message on any one of the social platforms. And here's to your brain health. Look forward to talking to you on the next podcast.